Rio when I wanted to learn flamenco, and I started with a few lessons with Mario Escudero, and then he disappeared like gypsies will, and I asked, who should I go to? That man, Dennis Koster.
The technical difficulties are very hard. Is there a reason for that? Yes. Joaquin Rodrigo is a brilliant composer, but he is also a blind pianist, or was also a blind pianist, and wrote the concerto for the guitar as if it were a small piano. And he writes densely contrapuntal passages in the highest registers of the guitar, which is something that most guitarists would never dream of doing. But in other places, such as the passage that Alan's working on in the middle movement, in the second movement, the technical challenge is to make the guitar sing like a human voice. The theme is one of the most gorgeous melodies in all of Spanish music. And then there's the musical aspect of the piece. I mean, those melodies in the second movement, those very beautiful melodies, are written in such complex notation that it takes just the longest time to get to really be able to play them correctly in time. And it takes a tremendous amount of intellectual work to divide up the beats and get exactly, all the 30 seconds, all the 64th, the triplets, this and that. Very complicated music. And then you have to play it as if to make it sound like a spontaneous and passionate improvisation. And that's one of the great difficulties of the piece. To be able to play it accurately in terms of the rhythms, and yet to also capture the spontaneous feel that he did in the composition. And one of the great aspects of the genius of the piece is that he could freeze on the page this kind of emotional outburst that would come only in a moment of complete freedom of expression. And he did it with such tremendous precision. So then you have to become extremely, detached and intellectual to realize his rhythms and then internalize them. First of all, I think the F to the B is very important. We'll get the interval to sound more. That's better. It's more connected that way. And this is such passionate music in here with these increasing note values. My best friend's older brother, Greg Green, gave me lessons, and I had learned Danny Boy, Drill Ye Tarriers Drill, and Dona Dona. I was doing just fine with the folk guitar lessons. And then the Beatles came out with I Want to Hold Your Hand, and the entire world changed for everybody. There were 3 rock and roll stations in New York, AM stations. And all the kids in those days used to go to sleep with transistor radios under their pillows. And what would happen is you'd listen to I Want to Hold Your Hand on one station, then you'd spin the dial to the other station, they'd start playing it, and then you'd spin the dial to the other station, they'd play it, and then that would be time. If you spun the dial back to the first station, they'd start playing it again. And it was this kind of mass hysteria that everybody went through. And as I was spinning the dial one night under my pillow, I suddenly heard this guitar music. And it sort of reached out from the transistor radio and grabbed me by the throat. And I had no idea what I was listening to. And I was just flabbergasted. I was stunned. I completely forgot all about the Beatles. At the end of the piece, this deep, resonant baritone voice came through. This is music from around the world. And that was the guitar of Sadikas. And I couldn't sleep that night. All I could think about was that music. It was so powerful. And the technique was unbelievable. Actually, at the time, I don't think I was thinking about the technique. It just had such an emotional impact on me. And the very next morning, I called up my guitar teacher and I said, I just heard this unbelievable music on the radio. I don't know what it was. Some guy named Sabikas. And he said, oh, that's flamenco. And I said, that's flamingo? And he said, no, you dumb kid. A flamingo's a big pink bird. It's flamenco. It's Spanish gypsy music. I became so passionate about it that I practiced more than my teacher did. And I became a total fanatic. I got all the Sabikas records. I got all the Mario Escudero records. Soon I caught up to him and he decided I should go to his teacher. He taught me for a while, and then he decided he was going to move to Spain and sold his practice to Mario Escudero, who was one of my great idols, who had just moved to New York. And suddenly I found myself studying with my hero, Mario Escudero. And studying with a great gypsy artist it can be very difficult at times. But I studied very, very hard. I studied with him for 3.5 years. And I became a professional flamenco guitarist, and I played in clubs in the village, and I played with dance companies in Carnegie Recital Hall. And maybe 25 years after I heard that Sabikas on the transistor radio under my pillow, I was hired by Erwin Frankel to do a gig. I was hired by Erwin Frankel is this wonderful promoter who used to do all this world music presentations in New York. And he was sort of like a Jewish Santa Claus. He had a gray beard. Erwin had this great deep baritone voice. And at one point he said to me, he says, back in the 60s when I had that radio show, Music from Around the World, I used to play Sadikas all the time. And suddenly it hit me who he was. I said, Erwin, that was you? And he says, yeah, Music from Around the World. I played Sadikas all the time. I said, Erwin, you're the whole reason I'm here today. And he looked at me very confused. He said, well, of course I am. I hired you. So things come round full circle. But that radio broadcast, more than anything else, brought me to the guitar. And I found an awful lot when I got there. Mario had studied flamenco with Ramon Montoya, who founded the entire school of solo flamenco guitar playing, concert flamenco guitar playing. And he also studied with Daniel Fortea, who was one of Tarega's greatest students. So I always was very awed by studying with Mario because, it was such a direct line to such great artists. And he was such a great artist. He'd played all over the world. He played with the greatest flamenco dance companies. He'd recorded dozens of records. Now, at the time, I didn't speak very much Spanish. He had just arrived in the States, and he didn't speak very much English. Flamenco music isn't written down particularly unless it's written by the maestro. He was perfectly capable. I know other people who studied with him, and he wrote books of music for them. But he took a very different approach with me. He taught me guitarra a guitarra, which is the old Spanish method. He would sit in front of me and play, and I would have to copy. And in the beginning, I was so awestruck by being in front of him and so terrified that I learned nothing. I mean, in the first few lessons, I learned a few notes here and there, but then I got very good at the method of learning. Wrote, and I got pretty good at memorizing. Now, he never said a word to me about technique. Well, that's not true. He said to me one or two things. He showed me that when you play a chromatic scale, you should keep all your fingers down on the fingerboard as you go up the scale. And that's very good advice. He said to me once, in English, and he didn't say all that much in English, he said, girls play here. Men play here. That's about as much as I could remember as he ever said about technique to me. But he was such a great virtuoso guitarist, and since every note I learned not by looking at a page of music, but by looking at his hands, by looking at the hands of this great virtuoso master. He never had to say a word about technique. And everything I learned, everything there was to know about flamenco technique, because I had to watch his hands so closely. I wasn't so fast. He'd have to repeat things many times. Escudero was a gypsy, and he sort of had gypsy ways also about teaching certain things. In classical guitar, when we have lessons in interpretation, we have all these Italian terms. We have piano, we have mezzo forte, we have crescendo, we have decrescendo, we have ritardando, we have all these expressions to explain different types of musical expression. But it didn't work that way with Escudero. Thing was, I got very good at memorizing a lot in the lessons. I'd repeat it like a little machine to him. I'd parrot whatever he showed me, and I got very good at memorizing the notes. On the way home from the lessons, I remember, I had to take a train and a bus to get to my lessons. And since he wasn't writing anything down for me, I just had to rely on my memory, and it would be about an hour and a half before I got home to practice. So I remember sitting on the subway going like this, trying to remember all the positions on my arm that he taught me from the falsettas I'd learned. I did develop a good memory because of this, and I can memorize classical pieces pretty quickly, which is a nice thing. And that was because of that particular training that I had. But I remember he took exception one day when he was teaching me a particularly emotional piece which he wrote, which was dedicated to Ramon Montoya, his teacher. And I was playing it back very mechanically because I just wanted to jam it all into my brain. And at one point, he just started laughing at me. And he laughed like that. I looked up, I was thunderstruck. And he goes, "Tú tocas como una máquina." And he started laughing. "You play like a machine." And he goes, toca, como una máquina. Venga, máquina, toca. And I didn't know what to do, so I just started playing. And he started laughing, and he was going like this. And then he got up, and he opened the door to the teaching studio, and he called his wife, Anita, escucha una máquina. And the two of them stood at the door, and the two of them laughed. And he goes, toca máquina. And I started playing, and they both sat there laughing. Anyway, that's how gypsies teach you about musical interpretation and playing with feeling. I don't think I ever didn't play with feeling in front of Escudero again, or put emotion into the music.
Mario Tulero, ole.
I have no objectivity whatsoever when I listen to the music of Sabicas. None. But I remember sitting in the seat waiting for Sabicas to walk out on the stage when I was 14 years old and shaking like a leaf from excitement. Later on in life, when I heard people like John Williams and Paco de Lucia, I was so overwhelmed by their technique. Oh my God, listen to how fast they could play. Listen to what they could do. Oh my heavens. I never ever had that kind of reaction to Savikas. It was when I heard his music, I almost started hallucinating. It took me to places I didn't know existed within myself. Tremendous passion. I just felt like I'd learned so much about life by listening to his music. Savikas is very, very special to me. Now, if I try, after years of experience teaching and playing and whatever, I listen to his recordings and I see a person who has command of the instrument that is just at the highest level. I hear music that transcends its medium. I hear it transcends the guitar, it transcends flamenco. It's like listening to Heifetz's greatest moments or Rubinstein's greatest moments. I mean, it's just a person who is so totally in tune, in touch with the instrument. His tone was so pure, so perfect. His phrasing, the instrument came to life and sang like a human being in a sense. I was very fortunate to meet Savikas in the early 80s and befriend him, actually. The man who introduced me to him gave me a hint. He said, never ask him for a guitar lesson. He'll never show you, he'll never give you a guitar lesson. But he'll teach you a lot if he likes you. And I said, I didn't understand. He said, create the atmosphere. And I had no idea what he was talking about. But I did play for Savikas, and he liked the way I played. I played, his material that I took off records, and he made some corrections here and there. But in getting to know him, I found out he was a tremendous fight fan. And he was a neighbor of mine. He lived very close to me in Manhattan. He had spent the last 30 years of his life, he lived in Manhattan. Never learned to speak English, but he lived in Manhattan. I found out he was a great fight fan, and the thing was I had HBO and he didn't. So I used to invite him over to watch the fights, and we'd have a wonderful time. He and his brother would come. His brother Diego, they would always jump up at the same time at the fight. When things got exciting, they would both jump up. Diego would jump up and yell, "Pégale! Hit him!" And Savikas at the same moment always jumped up and said, "Cuidado! Be careful!" Very often after the fight, I always made sure I had guitars on couches, on chairs, all over the room. I left whatever guitars I had were always out. And Savikas was so generous. He'd suddenly pick up the guitar and start playing for me. And then he'd look at me and he'd say, "Denis, toma esto, take this." And he'd teach me a falsetto. And so I did learn, he did show me quite a bit of music that way, and it was a tremendous privilege. One I valued so much. I remember when I was studying with Mario Escudero, and I idolized him so. He said to me an interesting thing once. He said, "I'm your actual teacher, but Savikas is your spiritual teacher." I don't remember ever really saying anything to him about Savikas, but I think he understood something about me. It's what I said. Savikas is the entire reason I play the guitar, the entire reason the direction of my life when I heard his music, and I think Mario understood that. But he also, I don't know, I think I learned more from the philosophy, from his philosophy. He was very philosophical. And he had this way with him when he held the guitar. I mean, it was so much a part of him. I remember him telling me when I was about 40 years old, he said, "When I was your age, the guitar was never out of my hands. From the moment I woke up till the moment I went to bed, the guitar was in my hands." He said, "I would eat with the guitar on my lap." And it got to the point with him where when he was holding the guitar and talking, he'd start playing, and then he'd be talking to you, and never really kind of knew where the guitar playing stopped and the talking began. It was this kind of seamless flow because it was all the same thing. And his main message to me, aside from teaching me the falsettos, was he always said to me so many times, cada hombre tiene que hallar su propia manera de tocar la guitarra. Every man must find his own way to play the guitar. And he was a very dear person when I knew him. He was, of course, quite old. I remember going to a flamenco bar and there was a guitarist there who was really rather dreadful. And he was playing along with a drum machine, and he saw Sabicas. He turned up the volume on his microphone, turned up the drum machine, and started flailing away violently at the guitar to show off it to Sabicas. And Sabicas said about him, about the worst thing I ever heard him say about any guitarist, because he never said anything bad about people. He turned to his brother and smiled, and he said, "Es la gracia de los cielos que cada hombre tiene su propia manera de tocar la guitarra." It's by the grace of heavens that every man has his own way of playing the guitar. So he was a very beautiful person, but the guitar playing, every note he ever played, I feel like it just embedded itself in my heart. So beautiful, so inspired. And he really, whether I'm playing Bach or Villalobos or flamenco, it's still, I want the guitar to sound the way it did when he played. I want it to have that effect on people, that magic effect that seemed to be so much more than the instrument itself.